Lena had always believed that her life with Mark was perfect, the kind of relationship most people only dreamed of. They had met when they were young, full of hope and ambition, and over the years they had built a life together that felt solid, a foundation of shared dreams and unspoken promises. From the outside, people would look at them and say they were a perfect match, that no storm could shake what they had. But life, as Lena was about to learn, often had a way of hiding cracks beneath even the most flawless surfaces. At first the signs were subtle, almost invisible, easily explained away. Mark started coming home later than usual, citing work demands or traffic delays, things that Lena accepted because she trusted him. She noticed the occasional hush over his phone, the sudden switching of screens whenever she entered the room, but she told herself these were trivial matters, things she might be imagining. Trust had always been Lena's compass, guiding her to believe in the best of people, especially in Mark. She had never been suspicious by nature, never one to jump to conclusions. Yet a tiny seed of doubt had begun to grow, small at first, almost imperceptible, but persistent enough to nag at her mind during quiet moments. Lena remembered the night it started to feel different. She had been cleaning up after dinner, putting dishes away, when she noticed his phone buzzing on the kitchen counter. Something compelled her to glance at it, a flicker of curiosity she would later regret. And there it was, messages not meant for her. Texts that spoke in tones of intimacy, affection, and secrets that should have been theirs alone. The screen glowed in the dim kitchen light, illuminating a world she had never known existed. A world where Mark had shared warmth and attention, not with her, but with someone else. Her heart stopped, her breath caught in her throat, and for a moment Lena could not move, could not think. She stared at the phone as if it held a poison she might somehow absorb just by looking. The words were casual but deliberate, written in a way that made it clear this was not a fleeting crush or a moment of weakness. It was sustained, intentional, and utterly cruel. Her mind raced, trying to reconcile what she saw with the life she had lived, trying to make sense of every moment, every smile, every touch she had shared with him. How long had it been happening? Why hadn't she noticed before? Had she been blind, or had he been so careful that she could never have known? A storm of emotions hit her at once: shock, anger, grief, disbelief, and a cold, sinking feeling of betrayal that spread through her chest like ice. The man she loved, the man she had trusted above all others, had chosen deception. The house they had built together, once a sanctuary, now felt like a trap, each familiar object a reminder that nothing was as it seemed. Lena wanted to scream, to throw something, to break the world that had betrayed her as much as Mark had, but she could not. Her body felt heavy with the weight of the revelation, as if the ground beneath her had shifted and she was sliding into a void she had never imagined. She thought about all the moments they had shared, the plans they had made for the future, the dreams they had whispered in the dark of the night. And everything seemed tainted now, rewritten in a light that she could neither ignore nor unsee. Yet beneath the layers of pain, a new, sharper emotion began to rise. One she had never felt before in her life, a desire for revenge. It started small, almost like a whisper in her mind, a fleeting thought that maybe he should feel a fraction of the pain he had caused her. But the whisper grew louder, insistent, demanding attention. She could picture it in flashes, him realizing what he had done, facing the consequences of his choices, feeling the sting of betrayal mirrored back onto him. The thought of revenge consumed her, even as her heart ached, a strange mix of fear and exhilaration running through her. She spent that night pacing the apartment, her mind alive with scenarios and possibilities, each one darker, sharper, and more precise than the last. She imagined confrontations where words cut deeper than knives, imagined subtle ways to unravel the life he had taken for granted. Imagined a world where the scales of justice tilted, if only slightly, in her favor. Sleep eluded her. Every time. She closed her eyes, she saw the messages, heard the laughter, felt the betrayal as if it were a living thing pressing down on her chest. And yet, even in the grip of her fury, Lena felt a strange clarity emerging. She knew that this was no ordinary heartbreak, no fleeting sadness to be soothed with time or conversation. This was a rupture, a fracture that demanded action, and she had to decide how far she was willing to go. Morning came, pale and indifferent, casting light on a woman transformed. Lena moved through the day in a haze, performing daily tasks with mechanical precision while her mind replayed every memory, every smile. Every whispered "I love you" that had now become a lie. Each memory became a tool, a piece of evidence, a reason to fuel the growing fire of her resolve. She watched Mark as he went about his morning, oblivious, sipping coffee, scrolling on his phone. Laughing at something she did not know. To him, life continued normally. To her, the world had split into two distinct planes: the life she had thought she knew, and the reality of betrayal that lay beneath it. And as she watched him, Lena's thoughts sharpened. She realized that revenge, if she chose it, had to be precise, thoughtful, controlled. Could not be impulsive, could not be wasteful. She needed to understand not just what he had done, but why, and how best to respond in a way that honored her own strength and intelligence. She began to notice patterns in his behavior, small habits that hinted at arrogance, overconfidence, and a belief that no one would ever see through him. Each observation became a building block for the plan she could not yet fully articulate. A mental architecture of strategies and possibilities. And yet, she also felt the first stirrings of doubt. Could she truly become the person who inflicted pain even on someone who had hurt her so deeply? Was revenge a measure of justice, or would it bind her to the same darkness she was trying to escape? Lena did not have the answers, only the urgency of her desire, the need to reclaim control over her life, over the narrative that had been stolen from her. The days passed in a blur of observation, reflection, and growing intensity. She replayed every conversation, every argument, every unremarkable moment that had taken on new significance in the light of betrayal. She learned things she had ignored before, small cracks in Mark's personality. Moments of inconsistency, glimmers of truth hidden beneath layers of performance. Her emotional state became a mix of heightened awareness and simmering intensity, every thought turning over the central question. How does one respond to someone who has taken everything you believed in and treated it as disposable? Lena walked through their shared spaces with a new perspective, seeing them not as markers of shared happiness, but as witnesses to the deception. Photographs on the walls, mementos of trips, little gifts exchanged with affection, they all became symbols of what she had lost, evidence of the life that was now fractured. And yet, amidst the storm of grief and anger, Lena felt a spark of determination. A sense that she could emerge stronger, that she could wield her intellect and careful observation as tools, that she had the power to decide the shape of what would come next. By the end of that first week, the initial shock had transformed into a focused, simmering intensity. Lena knew that she could no longer exist passively, that the betrayal demanded a response, but she also understood that she must tread carefully. Any rash action would satisfy only a momentary impulse and might leave her hollow, consumed by the very emotions she wanted to master. The apartment, once a sanctuary, had become a stage for a silent duel. Mark, unaware of the shift, moved through his days with casual confidence, while Lena plodded in quiet observation, mapping the terrain of human weakness, the subtle cues of guilt and hubris. Each glance, each passing comment, each careless word from him became fuel for her mental blueprint, shaping the strategies that would eventually demand attention. After the first shock of betrayal had settled into a simmering ache, Lena found herself living in a strange in-between world, one foot in her old life and the other in a growing obsession that demanded her attention. Each day felt like walking, a tightrope balancing the mask of normalcy against the storm raging beneath the surface. She went to work, smiled at colleagues, chatted casually with friends, and even laughed at Mark's jokes as if nothing had happened. Outwardly, everything appeared the same, but inside, her mind raced with strategies, plans, and calculations. She had learned quickly that revenge could not be impulsive. It required patience, observation, and precision. Her notebook, once empty, now filled with meticulous notes on Mark's routines, habits, and tendencies. She cataloged every small lie he had told, every story he had altered to hide his deception, and every hint of arrogance or overconfidence that suggested he felt untouchable. Lena realized that revenge was not just an emotional response. It was a psychological game, a battle of wits, and she needed to be sharper than she had ever been in her life. She spent hours analyzing every interaction she had ever shared with Mark, dissecting conversations, gestures, and even silences for hidden meanings. Memories that had once been warm now appeared tinted with betrayal, and she began to see patterns she had missed before, the subtle dismissals, the slight evasions, the quiet manipulations. Her mind was alive with possibilities, each one a potential way to make him confront the truth, to make him see, if only for a moment, the pain he had caused. But the more she thought, the more she realized that revenge carried a cost, not just for him, but for her. It was intoxicating to imagine the moment of exposure, the shock on his face, the sudden awareness of what he had done. But Lena also understood that if she allowed the desire to control and punish him to dominate her entirely, she could lose herself, trading one kind of pain for another. Each day became a struggle between two forces within her, the searing anger that demanded action and the quiet voice of reason that urged patience. She began to test herself, observing how much she could endure without revealing her awareness. She watched Mark interact with friends, noting how easily he slipped back into comfort. Oblivious to the consequences that might await him, she listened to his casual remarks, cataloging them for future use, and studied his patterns, imagining scenarios where she could confront him in ways that would be unavoidable yet controlled. It was a strange, almost surreal existence, living in plain sight while planning a response that required meticulous timing and emotional discipline. Lena found herself analyzing not only Mark but herself, questioning the morality of her own intentions. Was it right to craft a plan that would hurt another person, even one who had hurt her? Could she carry out revenge and still consider herself a person of integrity, or would she become the very thing she despised? The internal conflict gnawed at her, a constant companion as she moved through her days, turning over each decision, each possibility, each outcome in her mind. She realized that the challenge of revenge was not merely about making him pay. It was about maintaining control, about ensuring that she remained whole, that she did not let anger or desire for retaliation destroy her sense of self. At night, when the world grew quiet and Mark was absorbed in his own routines, Lena would sit alone in their living room, notebook open, and plan. She imagined confrontations, conversations, even small acts that could make him confront his own behavior. She considered subtle revelations, documents, messages, carefully arranged encounters that would allow him to see the truth without giving in to rash impulses. Each plan was weighed for effectiveness, impact, and personal consequence. Because Lena knew that one mistake could cost her more than satisfaction. It could consume her entirely. And yet, despite the careful calculations, the emotional tension was unbearable at times. The sight of him laughing, the sound of his voice, the simple presence of him in the space they once shared as a life together, it all drove a mixture of fury, sadness, and longing that Lena had never anticipated. She wanted him to understand what he had done, to feel the consequences of his choices. But she also recognized that no act of revenge could erase the betrayal. No confrontation could restore the innocence of the past. This duality became the heartbeat of her days, a rhythm of planning, observation, reflection, and emotional restraint. Every decision she made, every interaction with him, carried weight. And Lena became hyper-aware of her own behavior, monitoring herself as much as she monitored him. Slowly, she noticed that her perception of power was shifting. Revenge was no longer about acting in anger. It was about psychological mastery, about creating conditions in which the truth would emerge and consequences would be unavoidable. Without losing herself to the very darkness she sought to confront, she began to understand the subtle art of influence, the way small details could guide a person toward realization without direct confrontation. The way a well-timed question or carefully revealed piece of evidence could shift awareness. The way patience could be more potent than fury. Lena also started to study human behavior in a broader sense, not just Mark's. She read about emotions, manipulation, and psychology, seeking insight into how people respond to betrayal and how they process guilt. Each article, each book, each observation added layers to her understanding, shaping the way she planned her eventual response. Yet, the tension within her remained relentless. There were moments when she felt trapped by her own thoughts, when the desire to act immediately surged, overwhelming the careful restraint she had cultivated. During these moments, she would pace the apartment, sometimes talking aloud, rehearsing phrases, imagining confrontations, and considering all possible outcomes. Each time, she reminded herself that patience was her ally, that calculated action would yield more satisfaction than impulsive emotion. Slowly, Lena's obsession with the details became a form of empowerment. She was no longer simply the wronged partner. She was a strategist, a master of observation, a person who understood both the consequences of betrayal and the subtle art of justice. She began to see that revenge, when approached with discipline, could serve a purpose beyond immediate satisfaction. It could reclaim autonomy, assert boundaries, and restore a sense of control that had been shattered. But even as she honed her strategy, she struggled with the moral dimensions of her intentions. She did not wish to destroy Mark's life, at least, not in a way that would diminish her own humanity. The desire was for acknowledgement, confrontation, and perhaps a measure of discomfort, not cruelty for its own sake. This awareness, though, did not make the process any easier. The emotional weight of her planning pressed on her constantly, a shadow she could not escape. Every smile Mark gave her now felt like a test, every casual remark a provocation. Every moment of normalcy a challenge to her patience. The moment Lena had been preparing for finally arrived, though not with the dramatic fanfare she had imagined. It was a quiet Thursday evening, the kind of ordinary night that carried no hint of the storm that had been building silently for weeks. Mark was hosting a small work gathering at their apartment. A casual affair with a few colleagues, laughter, drinks, and the easy comfort of routine. To him, life was normal, a seamless continuation of the world he had always known, where every smile he received, every joke he told, and every casual remark he made went unchallenged. But Lena saw it differently now. She felt the weight of betrayal, the sharp edge of months of careful observation, planning, and internal struggle, all converging into a single point of decision. She had rehearsed this moment countless times in her mind, imagined every possible reaction, weighed every outcome, and yet, as she watched him laugh with his friends, so ordinary, so unaware, she felt the familiar tension of moral conflict rise. Again, standing in the kitchen, a glass of wine in her hand, she realized that revenge was no longer a theoretical exercise. It was real, tangible, and within her reach. Yet the closer she came to executing her plan, the more she questioned herself. Could she actually do it? Could she confront him, expose him, make him feel the full measure of what he had done without letting herself be consumed by anger or bitterness? Her pulse quickened, her mind raced. And every scenario she had practiced played out simultaneously, overlapping like a chaotic film reel. She thought of the messages she had discovered, the betrayal etched in every word, and how much they had hurt her. how much they had shifted her perception of everything she had believed about love, trust, and intimacy. And yet, as she considered confrontation, she also imagined the consequences. Public humiliation, emotional warfare, the potential of burning bridges. And the lingering impact on herself weighed heavily on her conscience. She realized, with a clarity born of months of struggle, that revenge was not a simple transaction. It was a complex moral choice, one that could satisfy desire in the short term but leave scars that might never heal. Lena moved quietly through the apartment, observing the guests, observing Mark. Noting every expression, every interaction, every subtle gesture of trust or arrogance he exhibited. Her mind worked at lightning speed, connecting dots, assessing probabilities, measuring the potential impact of every action she might take. The notebook she had kept hidden for weeks was at her side, filled with notes, observations, strategies, possible scenarios. It was not just a tool, it was a testament to her preparation, her patience, her resolve. She had rehearsed the confrontation, imagined every response, every denial, every feigned ignorance. And yet, she knew that real life rarely followed rehearsed lines. She had learned to expect surprises, to adapt, and to maintain control over her own emotions, no matter how intense. The provocation. The room was alive with laughter and conversation. But to Lena, it felt like a stage. Every actor playing their part while the underlying tension remained invisible, simmering beneath the surface. She could feel the electric potential of exposure, the moment when reality might pierce the illusion Mark had maintained for so long. And then she noticed at the subtle cues she had learned to recognize over weeks of observation. The flicker of arrogance, the careless gestures, the ease with which he assumed he was untouchable, was all there. The evidence she needed, yet the decision still rested entirely with her. She realized that the true power was not in simply revealing the truth, but in choosing how, when, and to what extent that truth would be experienced. She could expose him fully, force him to confront every detail of his betrayal. Or she could orchestrate a quieter revelation, one that would allow him to reflect without the chaos of public humiliation. The ethical dimension of her decision pressed on her mind. Was it better to act in a way that inflicted maximum emotional impact, satisfying her desire for justice? Or was it wiser to temper her actions, to assert her autonomy without compromising her own integrity? The answer was not obvious, and yet Lena felt an inner calm begin to settle over her. The months of planning, observing, and reflecting had honed her understanding. She realized that her own sense of self-worth and control was more important than any fleeting satisfaction derived from revenge. She took a slow breath, centering herself, and walked deliberately toward the living room where Mark was engaged in conversation. The room seemed to hold its breath with her, the laughter fading into the background as she focused on the precise moment of decision. Her mind replayed the past weeks, the discovery, the heartbreak, the sleepless nights, and the careful strategy she had developed. Every lesson, every observation, every emotional rehearsal had led to this instant. And yet, as she drew closer, Lena recognized a truth she had not fully considered before. Revenge, no matter how clever, was a double-edged sword. It could satisfy her in the moment, but leave behind echoes of bitterness and regret, tying her to the pain she was trying to overcome. She looked at Mark, laughing with his colleagues, oblivious to the storm within her, and felt the first stirrings of empathy, not for him, but for herself. She understood that her own future, her own emotional freedom, mattered more than the fleeting satisfaction of seeing him hurt. And in that realization, a remarkable clarity emerged. Lena did not need to destroy him to reclaim her life. She did not need to humiliate him to assert her own power. Her strength lay not in the act of revenge, but in her ability to choose her own path, to act with intentionality, and to define her life beyond the betrayal. The tension in her chest began to ease as she acknowledged this truth. She could confront him, yes, but the form that confrontation would take was hers to determine. It did not have to involve chaos, anger, or public spectacle. It could be measured, deliberate, and centered on her own growth rather than his punishment. Lena approached him and spoke calmly, her voice steady, her words precise. She did not reveal the messages, she did not accuse him publicly, but she conveyed, in measured terms, the depth of her hurt, the breach of trust, and the gravity of his actions. She observed his reaction carefully, the subtle shift in posture, the brief catch in his voice, the sudden awareness that he was no longer operating under the illusion of impunity. It was not dramatic, not explosive, but it was effective. Mark paused, blinked, and for the first time seemed genuinely aware of the consequences of his choices. Lena felt a surge of quiet satisfaction, a sense of control and accomplishment, that was profoundly different from the fiery satisfaction she had imagined. She had achieved acknowledgement, not destruction, and in doing so, she maintained her own integrity and emotional stability. The party continued, but for Lena, the dynamic had shifted. Mark no longer moved through the space with careless confidence. He was aware, subtly, that the balance had changed. And the knowledge of that shift empowered Lena in ways that raw revenge never could. Over the following days, she continued to navigate their life with newfound clarity.